Let's start with the ones that faced horrible injuries and work our way towards the accidents that caused multiple deaths. Tier 1. The rides that left people with severe injuries. Branson Coaster Tragedy. On June 20th, 2021, around 7:30 p.m., 11-year-old Alando Perry boarded the Branson Coaster in Missouri, an alpine ride where passengers control their own carts. Before getting on the ride, Alando's family informed the staff about his genetic condition, which severely impaired his vision, and specifically requested a double cart. But despite their concerns, staff insisted that Alando was capable of riding alone, reassuring the family of his safety. During the ride, Alando's cart suddenly decelerated and appeared to stop midair. Believing the ride had ended, he stood up and stepped off the cart. He fell onto the suspended track, and the roller coaster crushed and pinned his legs, trapping him beneath it. The rescue team responded immediately, but it took nearly 2 hours to free him from the wreckage. Alando was severely injured. Both his legs were crushed, and his right arm was broken. His condition was so severe that he had to be airlifted to a hospital in Springfield for emergency treatment. He underwent multiple surgeries initially, including skin grafts, and even though he survived the accident, the road to recovery was long and painful. Smiler crash. On June 2nd, 2015, one of the 4 trains operating on the Smiler started having a technical problem. But since the park was very busy, the engineers decided to use a 5th train to accommodate the riders. They first tested the train around the 14-loop ride without passengers, but it got stuck because of a headwind. Unaware that one of the carriages had stopped somewhere on the tracks, the engineers overrode it on the system, believing the missing carriage was just a computer error. The next train that went on the tracks had 16 riders, but a few moments into the ride, the moving carriage collided with full force into the stationary test cart on the same track. Everyone on board was injured, but the staff waited 17 minutes before calling 911, and even after the rescue team arrived, it took them 4.5 hours to free the passengers, who were suspended 30 feet off the ground at a 45-degree angle. 4 people were seriously injured as a result of the crash, with Daniel Thorpe having serious leg injuries, while Leah Washington and Vicky Balch both had to get one of their legs amputated, and Joe Pugh had to learn how to walk again. An internal investigation revealed the accident was due to the operator's fault, an error that cost Merlin Entertainment's £5 million. Superman, Tower of Power. On June 21st, 2007, at approximately 4:45 p.m., 13-year-old Caitlin sat on the Superman Tower of Power at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom in Louisville. The ride was controlled by cables and dropped passengers nearly 200 feet at 54 miles per hour. As the ride started going up the tower, the chairs began to jerk and make noises. Caitlin suddenly also started smelling smoke near her. All the passengers began screaming to get people's attention, and a crowd began to gather on the ground. Suddenly, a cable became loose and fell on Caitlin. It split her lip and nose before wrapping around her neck and shoulders. The operator heard the cable snap and even the loud screaming, but failed to press the emergency stop button. Caitlin was terrified that the cable would strangle her when the ride dropped and managed to remove it from her neck before it reached the top. Unfortunately, the cable was still looped around her ankles. When the Superman finally dropped, the cable shattered Caitlin's left femur while cutting off both her feet. When the ride stopped at the bottom, everyone was shocked at her condition. A stranger at the park immediately called her parents and informed them about the accident. At the same time, Caitlin was transported to the UL hospital for treatment. The doctors there were able to reattach her right foot successfully, but her left leg was beyond repair and had to be amputated below the knee. Tier 2. There's no coming back. Texas Giant. On July 22, 2013, 53-year-old Rosie Esparza was riding the Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington. She was seated in the 3rd row of the roller coaster with her son, while her daughter and son-in-law were sitting in the cart in front of her. Esparza expressed concern to the staff about her lap bar not being secure, but they assured her that it was functioning properly. At around 6:45 p.m., the roller coaster started moving on its track. Just as it reached the first large hill, Esparza's seatbelt became loose, and she fell 75 feet and got struck by a support metal beam. Her body then fell on the metal roof of a tunnel. Esparza's daughter and son-in-law started calling for help as soon as the accident happened, but it wasn't until the ride stopped that the staff saw her empty cart and realized what had happened. The emergency team was alerted right away, but it took them a while to actually locate her. When they finally found her on the platform below the roller coaster, firefighters used a ladder truck to retrieve her body. Unfortunately, Esparza couldn't survive the fall due to extensive trauma to her torso and multiple fatal injuries. Matterhorn bobsleds. On 3rd January 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Regina Young of Fremont was visiting Disneyland with her 5 friends. At around 3:30 p.m., Young and her friends loaded into a bobsled at the base of the Matterhorn. Young decided to sit alone in the very back, while her friends took the front spots. The ride started as usual, but just as the bobsled was halfway back up the mountain, another family passing into the Matterhorn saw Young fall off the cart. A girl waiting for the ride screamed as she saw a woman bouncing on her back on the tracks. She saw Young trying to stand up, but before she could make a move, the the next ride vehicle came around the corner. A family from British Columbia was in the oncoming bobsled. At first, they thought the body lying on the tracks was just a prop, but as they got closer, the horrifying reality set in. Both Young and the other family helplessly watched the bobsled crash into Young's head and torso, killing her instantly and trapping the bobsled on top of her. The system instantly shut off that portion of the ride, which, combined with screaming, alerted a worker that something was wrong. He raced up the mountain and found Young's bruised, lifeless body. Police and paramedics were soon on the scene, and Young was declared dead. They checked her cart and noticed the seatbelt was open, leaving two possibilities. Young stood up while the ride was going, or the seatbelt was undone from the start and she was simply sitting on it. Disney officials said it was standard protocol for staff to check guests twice to ensure they were fastened in, so there was no way that Young's seatbelt was undone from the start. However, her husband filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against Disney, claiming that her wife wasn't frivolous enough to stand up on the ride. He blamed the staff for failing to properly check Young's belt, and the suit was later settled. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. On September 5th, 2003, at about 11:20 a.m., the Big Thunder roller coaster carrying several passengers broke loose after the front cart, decorated as a small red engine, derailed as it was speeding uphill into a tunnel. The front of the engine suddenly nosedived downward, and just as its rear end was at the top of a tunnel, the tow bar connecting the engine and the first car broke off with a powerful jolt. Marcelo Torres's car crashed backwards into the roller coaster. People who survived the incident immediately clambered from their carts and ran out, calling for help. When the authorities checked the crashed carriages, they found 10 people to be seriously injured, and a 22-year-old Marcelo Torres dead on the spot. Emergency workers transported the other survivors to UCI Medical Center. Another 22-year-old, Vincent Gutierrez, was severely hurt due to the accident. He suffered facial cuts and chest injuries, including broken ribs. Later, Disney admitted the crash was due to severe maintenance negligence. The mechanic who was supposed to secure the engine didn't tighten its bolts and didn't attach a safety wire to the wheel assembly that fell off. In addition, the manager, who was responsible for ensuring passenger security, declared the ride safe without inspecting it. Disney took responsibility and settled all victim claims from the crash. Batman: The Ride. On 28 June 2008, 17-year-old Asia Leishon was visiting Six Flags Over Georgia with a group from Okie Springs Baptist Church. Just after lunch, the boy, along with his friend, jumped over 2 security fences around the popular Batman ride, completely ignoring the danger signs placed all around the restricted area. His friend stayed back, but Asia got too close to the roller coaster, which was going at its top speed of 50 miles per hour. Suddenly, the ride struck him and left him decapitated in a split second. The passengers were completely unaware of what had happened to Asia during the ride. When the roller coaster finally stopped, the boy's parents, paramedics, and the police were immediately alerted. Some witnesses say that Asia went to retrieve a hat that had fallen earlier, while others claim that he wanted to touch the passing roller coaster. However, the actual reason why he hopped the fences and entered the restricted area remains unknown. Mindbender. On June 14, 1986, Mindbender, the world's largest triple-loop roller coaster at Galaxyland, Canada, was gearing up for its third and final loop. However, missing bolts on the last car's wheel system caused it to come off the track and swing out of control. As the train hit the support beams, the safety bars popped open, throwing riders from their seats. The train then slid backward and crashed into a concrete pillar after failing to make the final loop. The accident was fatal for 3 riders, while 25-year-old Rod Chico was severely injured and had to spend 6 months in the hospital to recover completely. The ride remained shut for more than a year and reopened after safety modifications. The Mindbender remained a main attraction at the mall, despite the terrible accident, until it was permanently shut after 37 years. Tier 3, the deadliest roller coaster tragedies. Fujin Ray Jin 2. On May 5th, 2007, at Expoland in Suita, Osaka, Japan, a 6-car standing roller coaster was halfway through its 3,500-foot course when one of the axles started making strange noises. Before anyone could alert the ride operator, the carriage derailed and smashed into a guardrail. The impact was so severe that 19-year-old Yoshino Kogawara was thrown from the 120 kilometers per hour roller coaster along with 19 other passengers. Yoshino's head collided with the guardrail and was killed instantly, while the other riders were seriously injured. Investigation found the reason for the accident was workers' negligence. The axles on the roller coaster hadn't been replaced during the 15 years that the ride was operational. In fact, a year after the derailment, 3 employees admitted to deliberately postponing the ride's mandatory inspections. They even submitted a fake safety report despite the visible cracks on the damaged axle. Expoland faced huge criticism for its lack of safety measures after the accident. The park remained closed for 3 months, but people were reluctant to visit after it reopened. Finally, the sharp decline in guests forced the park to shut down permanently. Big Dipper. On 30th May 1972, several children and teenagers were waiting in queues for the Big Dipper at the Battersea Fun Fair. At around 2:30 p.m., 30 people boarded the three-car train, including a brakeman whose job was to slow down the ride at the end manually. The roller coaster started normally, but as it went up the first hill, just before reaching the peak, the rope pulling it upwards snapped. As a result, the entire carriage began moving backwards down the track. The train continued to gather speed, and despite the brakeman's constant efforts to stop the momentum, it continued down the track. People thought the entire scene was part of an elaborate prank designed to scare the riders, and they all began laughing. Even the children riding the train didn't realize anything was wrong. However, their laughter turned into screams when the first car derailed at the corner and jumped off the rails, falling 15 feet to the ground. Two more cars then disappeared behind the wooden screen covering the entrance area, smashing into another stationary train. Some of the children riding the Big Dipper flung out and landed in front of the crowds, while others were left hanging upside down over the railings and walkway area. Emergency workers quickly arrived at the scene and transported the injured children to the hospital. 3 children died at the scene, while 2 more lost their lives at the hospital. Another 13 riders were seriously injured in the accident. When authorities investigated the crash, they found 66 defects in the ride, 18 of them in the support of the structure. The Big Dipper was, quite literally, a death trap. Derby Racer. On June 8, 1911, 24-year-old Oscar Young boarded the Derby Racer at Revere Beach in Boston. The ride featured 2 figure-8 tracks running side by side, allowing 2 coaster trains to race one another. Around 9:30 p.m., the ride malfunctioned and violently threw Young from his seat. He suffered critical injuries, which later resulted in his death. Following the tragedy, the Derby Racer was shut down for 2 weeks for safety inspections. When it reopened, the CEO of the company that had built the ride took it upon himself to reassure the public. Before one of the runs, he stood up in a coaster car to speak to riders about roller coaster safety. In a tragic twist of irony, he lost his balance mid-speech, fell from the ride, and died on impact. Still, the Derby Racer continued operating. But 6 years later, another fatal accident occurred. A man riding the coaster lost his hat during the ride. When he tried to retrieve it, he fell onto the adjacent track and was struck by a passing train. He was dragged 35 feet before the ride came to a stop, suffering massive injuries. He died shortly after at the hospital. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or leave a comment to suggest another.